I'm thinking too of the first Adventist missionaries to Korea, 1905, I think.
Mm-hmm.
William and Addie Smith. They left Vancouver with their little baby. She was 9 months old. And they started work in Korea, what we would call North Korea today. And that little girl got malaria. She got sick. They took her to the Adventist hospital in Japan. She seemed to get better, came back, but she caught, I think, diphtheria, and she never reached 2 years of age. And she's now buried in Pyongyang, awaiting the resurrection of Jesus. And then a little later, they were able to have a son, but he got sick too, and so before he reached 3 years of age, he died. And so they buried 2 children right there in Korea, and they spent, I think, 2 decades there. They came back to America, leaving their 2 kids behind. And can you imagine? And the thing is, I was reading
North Korea. So buried in North Korea?
What's North Korea today? Yeah, and I was reading something that he wrote some years later, and when they boarded that ship in Vancouver, they didn't know anything about furlough or coming back. They never expected to come home. They got on that ship thinking, we are going for good, that we are never going to see our family back here again. That's the level of sacrifice that they were involved in.
The Lineage Journey podcast, unscripted conversations that aim to help you on the journey of discovering your lineage. Join us as we take a deeper look into past Lineage episodes and see the lessons we can learn for today.
I'd like to welcome you all who are listening to the Lineage Journey podcast. As you know, for our podcast, we like to interview people who are experts in their field of study or work in areas that we cover in our Lineage videos, but we're able to cover at more greater depth in our podcast interviews. I'm here with Pastor and Dr. Gary Krause at the General Conference headquarters. You are the director of
the Office of Adventist Mission.
Adventist Mission, yeah. Okay. And you've been here for quite a while, actually.
Yeah, more than 20 years.
Okay. And just briefly, you're overseeing Adventist Mission around the world. I know we're going to kind of maybe talk about that a little bit more later on, but this is...
yes, so it's kind of like an umbrella organization for 2 things. One is the Global Mission Initiative that started in 1990.
Okay.
And then Mission Awareness, where we try to raise awareness of church members about mission around the world.
Okay.
So the Global Mission side is all about church planting. So we do that through whatever means possible. We have Global Mission Pioneers who are church planters. We have urban centers of influence, which are platforms to start new groups of believers. And we also encourage everybody to focus on unreached people groups. And to help us do that, we have 6 global mission centers, which are tasked with finding methods, models, resources for helping us more effectively reach to the great world religions, to reach to urban areas, and also to reach to secular and post-Christian people. So those 6 centers come under that umbrella of global mission. Then Mission Awareness, we just try to tell church members what happens with their mission offerings. So we tell them the good stories of missionaries, what's happening through humanitarian work, what's happening through media, whatever. Okay.
So a lot of mission stuff.
Oh, of course.
So the 13th Sabbath.
13th Sabbath offering. Yeah, so
that comes under you as well.
Well, we promote it. So we have one of our staff members, Andy McChesney, writes the mission quarterlies for the adults and for the children. Then we also have Mission Spotlight, which is shown in many churches to promote the mission offerings, including 13th Sabbath offering.
Okay. So we're going to talk today about missions.
Yes.
And historical missions, but also we'll come up to the present day and also expound on some of the work that you're involved in. Today, in terms of numbers, and I know this is not a gauge of success.
Right.
But how many countries do we have an official presence in today in the world?
Right. So the United Nations numbers about 235 countries and territories.
Okay.
And we would have work in 212 of those.
Okay.
And, that's an important thing to look at, geography, but we also need to think in terms of people groups. So we could have a presence in one of those 212
Sure.
territories, but it doesn't say that our mission challenge has gone.
Yeah.
Can I give you an example of that?
Yeah, give us an example.
Okay,
Actually,
here's an example. Burma, Myanmar.
Mhm.
So we've had an Adventist presence there for 100 years. So it's one of the 212. It's been
That
ticked there
we've done.
Right, but when you look at it a bit more closely, 98% of the Adventist membership comes from a small minority of the population, the hill tribes people, the Karen, the Chin, etc. So the majority Burmese Buddhist population has scarcely been touched by the Adventist Church. So geographically, yes, it's in the table of 212 reached countries, but when we look in terms of people groups, we still have a big mission challenge. So we need to look at both.
Yeah. And I think that's I think that's maybe a mindset of the last 10, 20, 30 years of not looking at countries, but people groups and languages and so on.
Yeah, when Global Mission began in 1990, that's when we really started to think seriously about people groups.
Okay. Now back to the countries, you said, so 212 of 230. What I say 5 of those countries that we haven't entered?
Well, you're going to go to places like the Middle East, and so you're going to look at places like Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Then you're going to go across to North Korea.
Okay.
Then you have countries, and I don't want to say too much here. There's some that are officially unreached on the
we
list.
have
We have some,
yeah.
working. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in our early days when we were organized in the United States, or North America, who was our first missionary, official?
So the first official missionary sent by the Seventh-day Adventist Church was Pastor J.N. Andrews, and that was in 1874. So next year, I was going to say we celebrate. We don't celebrate. We remember 150 years. Yeah, so we don't celebrate it because we're still here, and he would be shocked, I'm sure, that if he was
still he wouldn't even fathom 2024.
Right, so that was 1874, and that was relatively late to be sending an official missionary, and part of that was the mindset of the early Adventist church. The small group of Adventist believers at first did not have a vision for going outside of North America, and they were a little flock of believers. They saw the immigration coming from all over the world. They saw people coming into American cities from everywhere, and so they said, we can actually go into all the world right here in North America. And so I remember reading Arthur Spaulding, the early Adventist historian, said that was a, quote, comforting rationalization. So, and you can understand it, though. You've got a few hundred believers. How are we supposed to go into all the world?
Yeah.
But that changed, and so J.N. Andrews was the first official missionary.
1874.
And went to Switzerland.
Okay. What were some of his challenges of being? Did the church really know what it entailed? And
not really, I don't think. So, he had personal challenges, of course. His wife had just died recently,
single parent.
So he goes a single parent with 2 young children, goes to the country. He had the language barrier. Back then, they didn't have any Institute of World Mission to give you any training, cross-cultural training. He arrived there, and of course, it's a different cultural setting. There were already some established believers there. How do you, as the person coming from America, relate to the Europeans? Everything from finances to language to culture, all sorts of challenges.
I'm sure it's pretty tough now. Now, we always say that J.N. Andrews is the first official missionary. But I believe, there was another one who went before him, Michael Chakowski. Now, he's an interesting character.
Colourful character.
Colourful is a good way. Why do we not claim him? But I know it's controversial because there's some parts of Europe where you go and if you don't speak highly enough of Michael Chakowski, they do get, a
little sensitive to it.
A little sensitive. Now, how important was he, and also, who was he, and what's the controversy about?
Well, he was he was a maverick, I'd say. This was a guy I think was probably ahead of his time. He came from Poland, involved in all sorts of things. He was a former Roman Catholic priest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he moved to the United States, and it was when he was in the United States that he'd become a member of another Christian denomination. Then he became a Seventh-day Adventist, and he immediately got involved in ministerial work in various places. But he always had this passion in his heart to go back to Europe. But the brethren, the administration, and the General Conference weren't ready to send him. They had concerns about his style, his finances, and whatnot. Interestingly enough, the Whites, Ellen White, the co-founder of the Adventist Church, and her husband, James, they seemed to have a bit of faith in him. They actually gave him a $100 check to help him with his ministry, etc., etc. But the bottom line is the General Conference was not ready to send him to Europe,
mm-hmm.
but being the maverick, being the entrepreneur, thinking outside the square,
Mm-hmm.
he actually got another Christian organization or some Christian people to sponsor him to go to Europe. So he went with that sponsorship outside of the framework of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But he was a Seventh-day Adventist,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he preached. And so he arrives in Italy. It was actually up in the Waldensian area in northern Italy, and he starts a group of believers, but for all intents and purposes, they're Seventh-day Adventists because he's teaching them Seventh-day Adventist teaching. And it's actually further down the track that his sponsors back in America discovered that he was actually teaching the Seventh-day Sabbath, etc., and eventually withdrew their support and funding. So another fascinating thing is that J.N. Andrews, who kind of like followed, he actually felt indebted to Tchaikovsky. He actually said that God in his providence had led for him to go to Europe. So you've got to take all that into account as well. He had kind of a sorry ending from what I understand. He left Switzerland and a group of believers that he had established there, and actually his family, and he went off to other areas. And as I understand it, he actually died destitute with no family around him.
Sad.
Yeah.
But he did do a lot of sacrifice. And
Amazing.
Like a real church planter.
Oh, yeah, he was a pioneer.
Now, aside from J.N. Andrews, let's kind of look at some of the other continents a little bit. Who starts the work in Africa?
So I'm not really sure. I know that the first person to the Kimberley area of South Africa, I think this is probably getting to the very beginnings, was actually a lay person who was a prospector, and he went to Africa in search of, I believe, diamonds.
Diamond, yeah, okay.
So I think he started official work there, and then sometime later, I guess 15, 16, 17 years later, the first official missionaries were sent there.
Okay.
And they were Pastor Boyd and a Pastor Doris Robinson.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Australasia,
So Australia, the region where I come from, the first missionaries were a group of 5 families.
Okay.
Who were sent to Melbourne, Australia. And the interesting thing about this is they were a mixture of, they weren't just pastors. So you had people like Stephen Haskell and his family were there, and then you had John Corliss, and then you had like printers and a colporteur, and so it was almost like we're not just sending a missionary pastor, but we're sending a
holistic team,
a team here who can start the publishing work, who can get things happening. And I believe one of them also was a baker who had come out of Kellogg's Battle Creek Sanitarium. So they were thinking about food work and that sort of thing as well. So
does he help start Sanitarium, or is that someone else?
Yes, he was a precursor to Sanitarium. Yeah.
Interesting.
So holistic is the word. They were thinking in terms of a holistic ministry. We're not just coming here to preach.
Yeah, fascinating. Asia, South America?
Asia was interesting because, again, it was a layperson who actually contacted the General Conference. he was a maverick too. He was a entrepreneurial type spirit person. He'd been a shepherd. He'd been a sailor, a seafarer, and he contacted the General Conference and said, I'd like to go as a missionary to Asia. And the response he got was not a positive one. And one of the things was that sometimes you do hear from the General Conference is, we don't have the money, and then followed by, you're too old. So he was a self-supporting missionary. He found his own way to Hong Kong, and it was Hong Kong where it was basically a ministry to boats coming in and out of the harbour. He didn't understand the local language or whatnot, but he planted the seed in that area. If you go to Hong Kong today, you can go to the cemetery, you can see his grave. It's still there.
Have you been to Hong Kong?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. What were some of the sacrifices or challenges that these missionaries would face? I mean, is it language the main issue, is support, or is it just because you've got to have a certain I don't know, constitution to just go to a country that no one's gone to and try and start something.
Yeah, and sometimes there were occasions where there were a small group of believers had started through literature that had somehow made its way there, and so for example, South America, the first official ordained pastor sent by the General Conference was Frank Westphal. But when he arrived there in Argentina, there had already been reports of some Sabbath-keeping German groups already in Argentina. So the first thing he did after they arrived there, just a few days after he arrived, he got on a boat, headed up the river to find this group, and he ended up working with them and established an Adventist church among that group. But yeah, I mean, just coming to a totally different culture, you are coming with language challenges, you have health challenges too, because most of these people are not immunized to the diseases they're going to face.
A lot of our didn't a lot of them die?
Oh yeah, many of them never came home. And you go to Sulusi College in Africa, and there's a little cemetery there, and you can see the Adventist missionaries who were buried there. They never went home. And I'm thinking too of the first Adventist missionaries to Korea, 1905, I think. William and Addie Smith. They left Vancouver with their little baby. She was 9 months old, and they started work in Korea, what we would call North Korea today. And that little girl got malaria. She got sick. They took her to the Adventist hospital in Japan. She seemed to get better, came back, but she caught, I think, diphtheria, and she never reached 2 years of age. And she's now buried in Pyongyang, awaiting the resurrection of Jesus. And then a little later, they were able to have a son, but he got sick too. And so before he reached 3 years of age, he died. And so they buried 2 children right there in Korea, and they spent, I think, 2 decades there. They came back to America, leaving their 2 kids behind. Can you imagine? And the thing is, I was reading
North Korea. So buried in North Korea.
What's North Korea today? Yeah, and I was reading something that he wrote some years later. And when they boarded that ship in Vancouver, they didn't know anything about furlough or coming back. They never expected to come home. They got on that ship thinking, we are going for good, that we are never going to see our family back here again. That's the level of sacrifice that they were involved in.
And for those listening who don't know what furlough is.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's kind of like where you give time for the missionaries to come back to their home country, to visit friends and family most importantly, to have a little bit of break away from the mission field, and then send them back refreshed. They didn't know such a thing existed. So they went on faith, thinking, I'm going to get on this boat. We're going permanently. Yeah.
Wow. What's the name of that missionary?
William Smith, and his wife was Addie.
William and Addie Smith. Yeah. Were they Canadians or American?
Canadian.
Canadian, okay.
Yeah, they left out of Vancouver.
Any other stories you have from early mission work that you would say are some of that stand out to you?
When I was a kid, growing up in Australia, I used to sit riveted in camp meetings as missionaries from the South Pacific Islands told their stories. And I can remember, for example, Len Barnard, who was a pioneer missionary in Papua New Guinea. He had a nursing background, and he actually went on a trek into the deep jungles of Papua New Guinea with a videographer who was actually a distant uncle of mine, Eric Weir, who was a pioneer videographer, well, not a videographer, cinematographer back then, you know, went in with all his film camera gear. And they trekked, I don't know how many weeks they had natives who were carrying their staff, equipment and whatnot. But they went into this territory, and Pastor Barnard was pulling teeth and doing simple health remedies. And there's actually a film of that you can still find online. You Google it, you'll find it. And he actually treated cannibals.
Wow.
I mean, these were the days that these were cannibals eating human flesh. And so they'd never seen anyone from outside their territory. This was the first white men they'd ever seen. So those sort of stories captured my imagination. And they were great storytellers too. They talked, and so he was a pioneer aviator. So he had a mission plane reaching into territories that would take months to try and reach otherwise. So they were always inspiring to me. Then stories like the story of Fernando Stahl and Anna Stahl going into the Peruvian Andes. Again, just incredible. I mean, today, missionaries today, we have certain expectations of what we're going to receive when we get there. These guys would sleep on the dirt floors, exposed to mosquitoes, insects, all sorts of diseases, etc. So the Stahls, he was noted by the locals as living among them. So he would travel, and he'd travel on horseback or whatnot, and he would live the way the people lived. He would sleep in their huts. He would eat their food, and they just loved him for it. And what I like about this story is that he was flexible. So he came there, and their first intention was, we're going to share Adventist literature. So they went door to door with Adventist literature. Well, they discovered a problem, and that is that 99% of the population couldn't read. And they discovered that this indigenous population were being suppressed by religious elites and political elites, and so they weren't educated. So they changed their strategy, and they started schools, they started clinics, they started markets, and very soon there were these clinics and schools dotting Lake Titicaca all around that lake, and the people became educated. They started living better. They started having hope. And Stiles received death threats from these elites because these people were starting to rise up and take responsibility for who they are and their rights, etc. And if you read the education textbooks and the history textbooks in South America, you'll read about these Seventh-day Adventist missionaries who came and empowered these people and started a social revolution where suddenly they're educated, they're making change, they're moving forward. And so I like to hear stories like that.
Fascinating. Well, I appreciate you sharing
Sure.
some of this history in the early pioneer missionaries. We're just going to take a break right now. For those of you who are listening, we're going to pick up some of these stories and what are some of the current challenges today after the break. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.
Lineage is a non-profit organization made possible by the generosity of supporters like you. Help us continue our mission by donating today at lineagejourney.com/give.
Hi everyone, my name is Suki and I'm the author of Bringers of the Dawn, A Journey Through the Reformation, which is actually a collaborative project produced by the Lineage Journey team. This book is a compilation of over 40 study guides exploring the Reformation. There's pictures, QR codes, study guide questions. It's great for personal devotions or even a small group Bible study. You can find this at our Lineage Journey website, website on www.lineagejourney.com/shop. So head on over there and grab your copy today.
Lineage Journey not only produces video content, but instructive and illuminating resources to teach young and old about Christian history. Lineage has produced an educational coloring book for people of all ages. It includes original artwork from Ashley Bloom, highlighting the various heroes of the Reformation. Each scene has a matching story, and there are also QR codes to connect you to the website for more information and to watch the videos. There are also fun facts and memorable quotes to accompany the scenes to color in. Designed for young and old alike, get your copy now at lineagejourney.com.
I'd like to welcome you back to our Lineage Journey podcast. I'm here with Gary Krause, who's a pastor and a doctor. He works here at the General Conference in the Office of Adventist Mission. And so we've been talking about missionaries and historical, but we're going to kind of come up to a little bit closer to our present day. And in the early days of mission, if I'm correct, it was mainly people were being sent out from places where the church was established. So
Correct.
From North America, Europe, Australasia, you mentioned about the missionaries from Australia that would go to the islands of the Pacific and so on. And they worked in those places. But I was just thinking that today, and I'm not saying this is necessarily good, because there's good parts to it, but there's also bad. From England, where I'm from, I don't know any missionaries. You know, and my guess is that your average young Australian today probably doesn't know so many either.
Right.
And a kid growing up in North America, USA, probably knows less as well. Now, to a certain degree, there's less missionaries going out for sure. I reckon as a percentage of our membership. But there's also a lot more local leadership. So in parts of the continent of Africa now, or pretty much the whole continent of Africa, it's all, the church is led from conference level all the way up to division.
Yes.
With local leaders, and same as the islands of the Pacific and South America and so on. So there's been kind of progression where even though the work started with Europeans or Westerners, want of a better term, they didn't hold on to it. They passed it on to local leaders. And how did that happen? I mean, it was that. I'm assuming that was the intention of the church. We got to empower the local leaders. You know, was that a process of 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or did it vary?
You look back and I saw that in 1948, the General Conference Executive Committee actually noted the fact that we need to start training Indigenous leaders to take over in mission field areas. But I guess it was in that post-colonial era that it started to change. And I can remember back years ago when I was younger in Australia, I remember the division president then, Walter Scragg, actually put together a plan for the South Pacific Islands where we want to make sure that we train local leaders to take over the leadership of the church and the institutions, and that's been a process that's been happening. And then, so we've seen that happening in Africa, we've seen that happening in Asia, etc. So it's been a process. In some areas it's been faster than others, but you look at the South American division, for example, and it wasn't until 1975 that they had a division president from South America. Oh, wow. So that's not all that long ago.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing process. And of course, we see the benefit as a world church of having people, sort of like a cross-pollination where we have gifts and expertise of different people being shared in different parts of the world still. So we don't want to be just isolated that in Australia we only want Australians, and we want to benefit from around the world. But it's been a process through that post-colonial era as we've followed the politics kind of, as it started to open up for local leadership politically. It's also done it for the church.
Do you think in some ways the church kind of has mirrored general society, that as colonialism fell,
definitely,
then local leadership took over? Or were we ahead of the curve, or we just kind of followed the curve?
I think we followed the curve.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like the country pulls out and then local leaders have to kind of be empowered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So today you're working in Adventist mission. Now, you explained it a little bit at the beginning, but if I'm correct, you're looking at it's really about empowering local leaders, church planters who are in the culture, as opposed to parachuting or bringing missionaries from outside in. It's like, with that.
Yeah. So we're part of what they call a department of the GC called Secretariat, and we work together with some other mission organizations in Secretariat. So there's Adventist Volunteer Services.
Okay.
Then there's something called IPRS, which cares for interdivision personnel. So these are missionaries who go from region to region. So our particular area is church planting, but we work with the missionaries who are being sent. We work with volunteers, and we try to work together in a way that is unified, integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the moment, we have a focus which we are calling missionary focus. And missionary focus is we need to start thinking about moving away from thinking just about our own territories, but also thinking about unreached people groups. So Global Mission is part of that initiative. So we are helping with our research. With it, we have what we call a mission priority system, an online system where we actually look at the data for where the church is and where the church isn't. And so we try to have a strategic view of how do we reach these unreached people groups. Now, part of that is to take missionary budgets from areas where missionaries are serving where the church is already established and then realign them to higher priority areas. That's one part of it. Then Adventist Volunteer Services is working on how can we move volunteers into these regions. And we want pioneers on the ground who are planting churches in these areas. And obviously there's times where we can't have local people because we don't have any local church members.
So it has to come from external.
Yeah, so we get people as close culturally as we can, because there's a lot of benefits to a global mission pioneer who speaks the language, knows the culture, eats the food. They are more naturally situated to be able to participate in incarnational ministry where they live among the people and work among the people. So our office helps give some strategic guidance to what are the high priority areas, who are the high priority people groups, but we work integrated with these other entities to help us focus on these unreached people groups or underreached people groups.
Underreached, yeah. So where are some of the places today where we have a lot of people groups that are not reached, even though we may have a presence in the country, but there's still people groups? You mentioned Burma at the beginning, but what are some other countries or regions of the world where there's a lot of work still to happen? Right, so we find it helpful to talk in terms of three mission windows, three high priority mission windows. So the first one is the 1040 window. And this is a term to describe people who live from Northwest Africa through the Middle East and into Asia. And roughly, if you think of the equator and you think of 10 degrees above the equator and then 40 degrees above the equator, in that window, stretching through those territories, you have 60% of the world's population. And it's just incredible when you look at it. Another way of looking at it is if you stood in Yangon, the capital of Myanmar, Burma, and you think of a 5,000 kilometer radius, a 3,000 mile radius, in that small area, 60% of the world's population live. So this is a densely populated area, and it's home to the major world religions. So this is the home of Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. It also has some of the world's poorest people and also some of the world's richest peoples. It also is home to communist countries. But the important thing is that in this window, most of the people have probably not even heard the name of Jesus. So that's number one window. Then we have a second window, which we call the urban window. And this is a particularly challenging area for Adventists because historically we've been country-loving people. Move to the country, get out of the city.
Exactly. And so we have tended, I'm going to say neglected, because Ellen White said that more than 100 years ago, so I can say it, that we have neglected the cities. But this is our new mission field, because more than 50% of the world's population now live in the cities. And some regions of the world, I just come back from Korea, it's almost 100% urban. So the urban window, with all the challenges that brings, lack of Adventist presence, the just densely populated populations, the diversity, the economic disparities and challenges, the racial challenges. So that's the second window. Then the third window is a rapidly growing mission window of secular and post-Christian populations. Now, Europe, where you come from, has been what I call the canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine. They used to take the canaries down the coal mine in case there were gas leaks, and the canary would be the unfortunate victim of the gas, but would warn the miners, get out quick. Well, Europe is the canary, because you have seen the challenge of secularism for decades now, and the church struggling to survive in a post-Christian environment. But we now see this stretching across to North America. The rise of the nuns, not the religious order, but the no religion, rapidly growing in this in America,
especially amongst Gen Z.
And then of course Australia, New Zealand, but we're also seeing it in urban areas anywhere in the world. Not necessarily post-Christian, but increasingly secularization, particularly among the younger people. So those are the three mission windows that we see at the moment. And so that within the 1040 window, of course, you see areas like Middle East, North Africa region. You think of areas like China. And in those territories, we have some cities of more than 1 million people that we have. Not only don't we have any Adventist church, we don't have any Adventist, and we have no record of any Adventist even visiting that city.
Wow.
So they're the sort of mission challenges that we're facing.
Do you know off the top of your head how many, and maybe you don't, but how many cities with 1 million plus people that have no presence?
I should, but I can't. I'm sorry.
Are we talking about 10 or 50 or?
Oh, we're looking at more than 50, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So more than 50 cities, over 1 million people that have no Adventists living there or working.
Some of them we have no living and working there. In some, we might have a very small presence struggling to exist, struggling to do their work.
But even still, if you have 5 people, it's nothing.
Right.
Half a million people, yeah. So we need more missionaries.
We need more missionaries. Part of the challenge too is that we've defined missionaries very narrowly. So we've tended to think of terms of fully funded missionaries sent by the General Conference overseas, and they're very important. But we also need to think more widely. And I know that there are some Adventist young people who have been very successful in their businesses. They may get to 50, 55 years of age. They can retire.
True, yeah.
Why can't we give them a challenge? Don't rely on the General Conference to fund you. Why don't you start up a business in one of these areas? Why don't you go there, locate yourself there, not for the purposes of business, that's just your excuse to be there, but then to be a witness.
Like a Waldensian missionary.
Right. So a doctor, a nurse, an engineer, look in the ads in the Middle East. Find a job on your own volition. Don't go as a Seventh-day Adventist missionary. Many of these places you can't. But go there, find a job, and then we will help mentor, train, look after you while you're there, but you're employing yourself. You're not an employee of us. Then we have literally thousands of young Adventist volunteers who are willing to go, but they just need to know where and how and why. I'd like to tell those who are listening that there is a website called Vivid Faith. And Vivid Faith is established recently, and this is a wonderful place to go to match your gifts and interests and talents with opportunities. And the beauty of this is that we have thousands of people now registered on that looking for opportunities. The challenge is we don't have enough opportunities for those volunteering, because it does take a little bit of work on the other end of organizing. Okay, this is where we're going to locate you. What are you going to do here, etc.? How are we going to look after you? But we have such a massive human resource.
People.
Young people who are ready to go and do something. We just need to get creative and start looking for, here's an opportunity for you.
Okay. So the challenge is the challenge financial, or is it more personnel and opportunities?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think if we had the finances, like one of my passions are urban centers of influence, which are small platforms in cities for us to put Christ's method of ministry into practice, that we can connect with needs, mingle with people, show sympathy, minister to their needs, win their confidence, bid them to follow Jesus, and start new groups of believers. So what we're thinking of in terms of centers of influence are anything that will connect to needs in the community. Now, Ellen White used this concept, and she had in mind things such as vegetarian cafes, health treatment rooms, that sort of things. But today it could be an English language school. It could be a place where you get motor mechanic training,
financial advice.
It could be a climbing wall, whatever. And we see dozens of different types of centers. But if we had the funds, we could help fund young entrepreneurs to start some of this. Start a juice franchise where across cities across Europe you have juice bars where people come in, low overheads, not a huge investment, but we have that. And again, it's just a platform where we connect with people in the community, because I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of third space, which is a place between your home and your work where traditionally people have come together to socialize and connect with the community. And that has been in England, like the pub, whatever. So we can provide third spaces where we're not inviting people into a church building, which increasingly, particularly in these three windows, is threatening.
It's harder,
for a secular person, it's a big cultural barrier to come into a Seventh-day Adventist church, because they look at the walls of the church and they think, well, that represents the people who have been involved in religious violence through the years. These are the people who hate homosexuals, or whatever misconceptions they have. Those walls are a barrier. But if you have a center of influence, it serves as a non-threatening, neutral platform where you can actually love people in the community.
So we go back to some numbers, if you know. So there's about 20 countries we're not in yet, but can you put a finger on or on a number on how many people groups we have yet to reach in the world?
It all depends. It's quite a nebulous area, because it depends how you define a people group. So we tend to look at language groups.
Okay.
And if you're looking at language groups, hundreds.
It's in the 100, okay.
Yeah, several hundred. But, a people group can also be, I think, for example, the city of Sao Paulo and in Brazil, we have hundreds of Adventist churches there, praise God. And it seems you can't go 100 meters before you reach a Adventist church, but they tend to come from the same demographic group. And so the middle to upper classes are not represented as strongly in these churches. So there's a people group there. Skateboarders are a people group.
Bikers.
Surfers are a people group. So if we start thinking in terms of those, then the number increases exponentially.
Depends on, He who defines the terms
right
is the key thing in life. What would you say to the person who's thinking of quitting their job, or maybe even listening to this is thinking, maybe God's calling me? What would you say to that person, quitting their job or or even school, or maybe they've decided to, but they've got family pressure not to. What would you say to that person?
I would encourage them to pray about it and to seek counsel from trusted spiritual friends, mentors, family members, etc. Because in one sense, we need church members working where they are, because we need doctors in hospitals that are not Adventist hospitals who can be a witness in those hospitals, because they're going to reach people that you and I could never reach. We need teachers teaching in non-Adventist schools, because they're going to have a sphere of influence that we don't have. So in a sense, you can, well, not in a sense, you can be on mission wherever you are now. But if you feel on a call in your heart to go to a higher priority mission area, like to reach unreached people groups, or just to go overseas or something like that, if you feel that call, don't give up your job immediately. Don't resign from your school. Pray about it, think about it, then look for what those opportunities might be. Make sure that there is something there that you can go to. Go to places like Vivid Faith and go online there. Search through those opportunities to see if there's something that matches. And then if you feel convicted, do it.
Don't hold back.
Don't hold back. You know, if you feel that call, the worst thing in the world is to say no. You don't want to end up being like another Jonah. I'm not going to say you're going to be swallowed by a fish, but something, you know, I would say, and the testimonies that you get over and over again from volunteers and people who have gone is, I've been blessed more than the people that I've blessed. You know, it has been an enriching experience for me.
It's more blessed to give than receive.
Yeah.
It's a biblical principle.
Yeah.
Do you have, I mean, we mentioned earlier some of your favorite stories of early mission work, but do you have a favorite missionary, and why?
Yeah, you know, I think the styles would have to be high up there.
Okay.
One of my favorites is Georgia Burris. And Georgia was living in California, and she became an Adventist in her early 20s, the only one in her family.
Okay.
And she happened to be in a meeting when Stephen Haskell, senior Adventist pioneer, came and talked about the needs of India. He had just come back from India. And so she was convicted that she would like to go and work particularly for the women of India.
Okay. And
there's a particular group of women who, they're kind of like a shut-in group who are kept within the family household, and they never see the light of day. They're in there, and she wanted to particularly minister to those people. So anyway, to make a long story short, she volunteered. The GC chose her to go as a missionary. She went to Battle Creek Sanitarium, where they had a preparation for missionaries who were going to go overseas. And in 1894, she got on a boat to go to England, and then from there on to go to India. Now, on that boat were also Doris Robinson and his family, who we met earlier, who had gone to Africa. And they stayed for a while there in London, and she learned that they had plans to stay there for many months more, but she was eager, enthusiastic, impatient to get to India. So she got permission to get on a boat and go to India ahead of them. So here she is in her mid-20s on a boat by herself, the first Seventh-day Adventist woman missionary to a non-Christian country.
Wow.
And so she arrives in India, and she didn't know if there was anyone there who she could meet or what to do and whatnot. Wow. But fortunately, there was some lay people who were there for some reason or whatnot, but she found some accommodations there, ended up in the Women's Christian Temperance Union for Women, and found a nice place there. But she learned the local languages, plural.
Wow. She
worked for orphans. She worked for women. The first non-Christian believer in India was the result of her ministry.
Wow.
So it was a young woman who said, I will go, and she went there. And the incredible courage of her.
Yeah, complete pioneer.
She went with nothing, because she was in Battle Creek, and the story goes that she was supposed to the word had come, go to New York to catch the boat. The problem was she sat there with her trunk all packed, but she didn't even have enough money to get to the train station. So the steward of the sanitarium came in, saw her there, and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Problem is I don't have the money to get to the train station." He rushed out. Apparently he found $100, came back, put it in her hand and said, "Get going."
Wow.
So that's what she did.
Wow.
And so she ended up spending decades of her life in India. She married a fellow missionary eventually, but she was instrumental in starting the work in various places in India. Yeah.
Wow. Georgia Burris.
Georgia Burris.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.
And
My
thank you
privilege.
for sharing. And I pray that for those of you who are listening, it's been a blessing, and that our heritage of mission work may inspire you to be a missionary wherever God calls you.
Thank you, Adam.
Well, thank you for your work as well here at the General Conference and in Adventist Mission. We pray God may continue to bless and use you. For those of you who are listening and tuning in to Lineage Journey podcast, thank you for listening. There's other podcasts on mission, on other areas of our Adventist history and other areas of Christian history, Reformation history, so please do check them out. It's important to understand our heritage, to find out where we come from, to understand why we're here, and to see where we're going. For more information, please check out www.lineagejourney.com, and you can find us on our social media pages of Lineage at Lineage Journey as well. May God bless you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. What we do at Lineage Journey is made possible through your generous support. Did you know you can become a monthly donor, contributing any amount at lineagejourney.com/give? Nothing is too small. Your contributions help fund the production of our varied content, and we truly appreciate your support.